German tank crews had a nickname for it, Dosenöffner, the can opener. But that name wasn't about what the weapon could do to armor. It was about what happened to the men inside when a 152mm shell hit their tank. Even when it didn't penetrate, the sheer kinetic force would tear turrets clean off their mounts, shatter internal components, and kill crews through spalling, fragments of their own armor ripping through the fighting compartment at lethal velocity. The Germans had built what they thought were impenetrable steel fortresses, Tigers, Panthers, Tiger IIs, with frontal areas up to 180mm thick. And then the Soviets showed up with something that didn't play by the rules of tank warfare at all. When the Wehrmacht pushed into the Soviet Union in 1941, their panzer divisions had faced exactly what they expected: obsolete Soviet tanks that could barely penetrate German armor, towed anti-tank guns that were slow to deploy, and artillery that took minutes to zero in on targets. German tank doctrine relied on mobility, superior optics, well-trained crews, and armor that could shrug off most Soviet anti-tank weapons. A Tiger tank commander could engage Soviet T-34s from ranges where return fire was ineffective, methodically destroying them one by one. The math worked. German armor dominated the battlefield through technical superiority and crew training. But at Kursk in July 1943, German tankers encountered something that changed the calculation completely. Self-propelled guns mounted on KV-1S chassis carrying 152mm gun howitzers. These were the ISU-152s, and they weren't designed to fight tanks at all. They were bunker busters, meant to demolish concrete fortifications with massive high-explosive shells. But Soviet crews discovered something unexpected. When you hit a 65-ton Ferdinand tank destroyer with a 43.5-kilogram shell carrying around 6 kilograms of TNT, penetration became irrelevant. The impact alone crippled the vehicle. Soviet testing reports describe what happened. A 152mm shell striking the frontal armor of a Ferdinand, armor 200mm thick that could stop any conventional anti-tank round, created blast forces so extreme they tore the gun from its mounting, collapsed internal bulkheads, and left the crew unable to function even when the armor technically held. Against the Panthers, the results were even more dramatic. Shells that hit the turret didn't just penetrate the 45mm side armor, they blew clean through both sides, leaving exit holes you could put your fist through. The Su-152 earned the nickname Zvereboy from Soviet troops, beast killer, because it could kill the German zoo, tigers, panthers, elephants. But the Su-152 had problems. It was built on the KV-1S chassis, a heavy tank that was already being phased out of production. The armor was only 65mm thick, leaving it vulnerable to German anti-tank guns at range, and by late 1943, the KV production lines were shutting down. The Soviets needed something better. In June 1943, engineers at Factory No. 100 in Chelyabinsk began work on a replacement. The project was led by Josef Yakovlevich Kotin, chief designer of Soviet heavy tanks, with G.N. Moskvin handled the detailed design work. The concept was simple. Take the proven 152mm ML-20S gun howitzer from the Su-152 and mount it on the new IS heavy tank chassis. The first prototype, designated IS-152, underwent trials in September 1943. Testing revealed problems. Serious ones. The design went back for modifications. A second variant, Object 241, entered trials in October. This version worked. On November 6, 1943, it was officially adopted as the ISU-152. Production began in December at the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant, replacing the Su-152 on the assembly lines. The ISU-152's advantage went beyond just the chassis. Armor protection jumped from 65mm on the Su-152 to 90mm on the ISU-152, sloped at 30 degrees. This made an enormous difference. PaK-40 class guns struggled against the ISU-152 front outside close ranges, especially at angle. Even the Tiger's 88mm gun had to close to medium range to reliably punch through, negating the Tiger's traditional advantage of long-range superiority and putting it within effective range of Soviet guns. The 152mm ML-20S fired multiple ammunition types, but two mattered most in combat. The OF-540 high-explosive round weighed 43.56 kilograms and carried nearly 6 kilograms of explosive, enough to demolish a medium-sized building with a single hit. For penetrating armor, the BR-540 armor-piercing round weighed 48.78 kilograms and left the barrel at 600 meters per second. Then there was the concrete piercing round at 56 kilograms, designed specifically to crack fortified bunkers that conventional shells couldn't touch. But the weapon came with brutal trade-offs. The ammunition was so heavy that only about 20 to 21 rounds could be stored internally, typically 13 high explosive and 7 armor piercing. Each shell required a strong loader, and the two-piece ammunition meant separate loading of projectile and charge. This dropped the practical rate of fire to just 2 to 3 rounds per minute. A Jagdpanther could put out 5 to 8 rounds in the same time. In a sustained firefight, the ISU-152 was outmatched. Resupplying ammunition was a nightmare. Reloading the rack was slow and exhausting. Crews had to manhandle massive two-piece rounds through hatches under fire, often taking many minutes, even with experienced loaders. This meant ISU-152s needed constant resupply from armored carriers during extended operations, creating dangerous bottlenecks when ammunition ran low. The gun itself had other limitations. Mounted slightly off-center in the casemate, it could only traverse 12 degrees left and right. Precise aiming meant repositioning the entire 46-ton vehicle using the tracks. And with only 3 degrees of gun depression, the ISU-152 couldn't fight from hull-down positions on hills. It needed flat ground, streets, fields, urban terrain, where its limitations mattered less. But in the right conditions, the ISU-152 was unmatched. During the assaults on Berlin, Budapest and Königsberg, ISU-152s proved invaluable in urban combat. They would advance 100 to 200 meters behind IS-2 heavy tanks, providing fire support against fortified positions that conventional tank guns couldn't crack. The 152mm high-explosive shells could demolish entire buildings. A single hit on an unfortified house was usually enough to kill everyone inside. Soviet tactics evolved around the weapon's strengths and weaknesses. ISU-152s operated in pairs, supported by infantry squads. The infantry provided protection against Panzerfaust teams, German soldiers with handheld anti-tank rockets, who would hide in buildings and ambush armor at close range. The ISU-152's 12.7mm DSHK heavy machine gun was particularly useful for suppressing Panzerfaust gunners hiding in upper-story windows or behind barricades. The infantry squad would include a sharpshooter, submachine gunners, and sometimes a flamethrower. Effective teamwork meant minimal losses. Break that coordination, and ISU-152s became easy targets. When the ISU-152 fought as a tank destroyer, it inherited the Zveroboy reputation from the Su-152. The armor-piercing BR-540 shell could manage roughly 125mm of penetration at 500 meters on a square hit, and around 115mm at 1,000 meters, though combat conditions affected the results. This was enough to defeat the side armor of Tiger I tanks, 80mm, and Panthers, 45mm, even when angled. But the Soviets learned quickly that penetration was beside the point. The momentum and explosive energy did the work regardless. A German tank commander's account from the fighting near Zilo Heights in April 1945 describes what it was like facing ISU-152s from inside a Panther. His platoon had taken up positions in a tree line, hull down, waiting for Soviet armor to advance across open ground. When the ISU-152s appeared, moving behind IS-2 tanks, his gunner acquired the target at about 1,200 meters. The first shot hit the ISU-152's frontal armor and did nothing. Before they could reload, the ISU-152's gun swung toward their position. The commander ordered immediate withdrawal. They reversed into the tree line and relocated 400 meters. From their original position, they watched the 152mm shell detonate. Not a direct hit, but close enough that the blast stripped branches off trees and left a crater 3 meters wide. The message was clear: you didn't trade shots with an ISU-152. You killed it first, or you ran. Soviet crews learned to use the ISU-152 from ambush positions. They would position the vehicle to expose only the heavily armored casemate and wait for German armor to advance into effective range. At 500 to 1,000 meters, the 152mm shell's trajectory was still relatively flat, and a hit on any German tank meant mission kill at minimum. There are documented cases of 152mm shells striking Panthers and separating the turret completely from the hull, not knocking it askew, but throwing it several meters away. High explosive shells that struck Tiger tanks without penetrating the frontal armor would still create such extreme overpressure inside the fighting compartment that crews were incapacitated or killed. Spalling, fragments of the tank's own armor breaking off the interior surface, would shred anyone inside. The Soviets organized ISU-152s into independent heavy self-propelled artillery regiments. Each regiment had 21 guns, divided into 4 batteries of 5 vehicles, plus a command vehicle. Between May 1943 and 1945, 53 of these regiments were formed. By December 1944, Guards heavy self-propelled artillery brigades with up to 65 ISU-152s or ISU-122s each provided concentrated heavy fire support for major offensives. During Operation Bagration in June 1944, ISU-152 regiments advanced alongside T-34 and IS-2 tanks, using their 152mm guns to demolish bunkers and German strongpoints. The high explosive shells were devastatingly effective against fortifications, allowing Soviet forces to rapidly encircle German defenders. At the assault on the Zelo Heights in April 1945, ISU-152s from the 1st Belarusian Front breached the heavily fortified German positions protecting the approaches to Berlin, firing point-blank at pillboxes and Tiger II tanks. Urban combat in Berlin itself resulted in 30 to 50% losses per ISU-152 regiment due to close-quarters ambushes and German artillery. But the vehicle's thick armor and overwhelming firepower allowed crews to systematically clear buildings and street barricades. Some of the first Soviet units to enter central Berlin were ISU-152 regiments, using their howitzers to blast away German strongpoints at ranges measured in tens of meters. Between December 1943 and May 1945, the Soviets produced 1,885 ISU-152s. Production continued after the war, eventually reaching 3,242 vehicles by 1947. The design was continually improved, night vision equipment was added, the engine was upgraded, ammunition capacity increased to 30 rounds, and various automotive improvements extended its service life well into the 1970s. The ISU-152 saw service far beyond World War II. Poland received over 30 during the war and used them until the early 1960s. China, Czechoslovakia, North Korea, Egypt, Yugoslavia, and Romania all operated ISU-152s. Egypt used them as static firing points during conflicts in the 1960s and 1970s. Finland captured at least one during the Continuation War. The vehicle's long service life across multiple armies demonstrated the soundness of its basic design, even as tank warfare evolved beyond it. But it was in World War II that the ISU-152 earned its fearsome reputation. For German crews who'd been trained to believe their armor made them invulnerable, the ISU-152 represented something fundamentally different from other Soviet weapons. Against a T-34, you had options. You could outrange it, outmaneuver it, use superior optics to spot it first. Against an ISU-152, those advantages disappeared. When you saw that massive casemate swivel toward you, you had one chance: kill it first or die trying. Because when that 152mm gun fired, survival wasn't about crew training or armor quality anymore. It was about whether you were unlucky enough to be in the impact zone when 43 kilograms of high explosive arrived. The Germans called it the can opener, not because it could peel back armor, though it could, but because it reduced their most sophisticated armored vehicles to scrap metal and the crews inside to casualties. It was a weapon that made armor protection secondary to raw explosive force, and German engineering had no counter except destroying it before it fired. In the rubble of Berlin, in the streets of Budapest, across the approaches to the Reich, German tank crews learned that lesson over and over. The ISU-152 didn't fight fair. It didn't need to. If you want more stories about weapons that changed warfare through psychological impact, rather than just technical specifications, hit subscribe. We dig into the engineering decisions and battlefield realities that determined which side won and which side died. Because understanding the why matters more than just knowing the what.